Good afternoon. In this video, we're going to go over this week's options watch list. Now, before I get into the watch list, I just want to say that if you're not in the room, you can find the link in the description of the video and in the bio section of social media. Also, looking at the economic calendar, we do have Powell speaking on, let's see, Wednesday at 11:45 a.m. That's kind of a weird time, but let's see what he's speaking about. Just policy panel and stuff like that. At the ECB forum on central banking. I mean, looks like he's just going to be virtual, but he's going to be speaking, so be aware of that. Make a note of that. That could affect the market. You don't want to be in a trade at 11:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and find out that he says something and you just get calls get smashed or your puts get smashed. So just be aware of that and make a note of it. So now I don't have much on. I have pins up here, but I'm going to switch over. I'm going to do the bearish side first because I only have a couple on the bearish side. One of them is Nike. Now I know Nike got hammered for earnings, but I'm looking at the daily here. Just gonna make sure everything's working on my end. Yeah, that it's in the middle of nowhere. Wait, it did close right at gap support, kind of close to it. It's not an exact number. It's usually about an area, but it's got a big gap to fill right here. So if it does manage to get below 148, it's probably going to fill this gap and come down to the 140 area, 135. So I would definitely watch for a nice drop on Nike. So I would watch for that. And on Disney, I know Disney had bad news the other day, and they kind of rebounded a little bit on Friday, but it's still flirting with it. Look, I still managed to close above the RCT trend line on the weekly, and the more it touches, the more I think it's gonna just fall apart at some point. So will it be this week? I don't know. I mean, I've been seeing that on some stocks for a while, and it just took weeks and weeks, and sometimes even a month or two. But it just seems like that it's just riding this RCT trend line on the weekly, and eventually it's gonna give. So so I would watch it underneath, I'd say underneath 171 for pushed back down to 170, 169. Now, if it does manage to break that 169, you get this 168 area, which is basically where, let me just back this out just a little bit by the time frame, 9 months, maybe that's enough. No, you're probably going to have to go a year. You can't see it on the, yeah, you can't see it on the weekly, but you can see it right here. I tried to fill most of it right there, but it didn't quite do it. But this 167, 168 area, then you get this 160 area, then you get the gap fill right here, right around 158. So I think it's just a matter of time before it does fill it. I mean, you get a head and shoulders, you get the left shoulder, the head, and a massive right shoulder. The pattern's still there. It still exists. It's not void yet. The only way it's going to void is if it ends up, coming up to 200 again. But the pattern's there on the weekly, on the daily, and stuff like that. So I would keep an eye on that on Disney. Now, on the bull side, we get more. SPY. I don't think SPY has any reason to really pull back. I mean, not unless something else happens. Unless Powell could make a dip on Wednesday, but get earnings season kicking off in a couple weeks. I mean, this is the end of September in a few days, so that's going to be the end of the third quarter. So we're going to have earnings season coming up in the next couple weeks. So we'll have some earning run-ups and stuff like that. So I would imagine that SPY is going to keep gapping and grinding to all-time high until for the next couple weeks. Then but I don't really see anything on the horizon that could possibly bring it down except for the next FOMC in November. But I mean, obviously something can happen overnight. Who knows? Anything can end up happening, and the market could dump. So I would just buy the dips until something changes on SPY. So I would watch it obviously over 445 for a push to 447, 450. And obviously all-time high at 455. I think that you're going to see it all-time high this week. I could be wrong, but I don't really see any reason for SPY to pull back. I mean, it had that Evergrande thing, whatever it was, that made it drop right here, and it got quickly bought back up. So even if the Fed says they're going to taper, which I don't think they're going to, and they may hint it here and there, but I think the November one is when they're going to actually say something. I was expecting something to happen this past week, but this past FOMC, but nothing really happened. So November will be the one that we'll have to see if that actually happens. Now, BABA is one. I know the Chinese stocks have been getting hammered. BABA, at some point, you would think it would bounce. I mean, it looked like it was going to bounce right here, and it didn't. Now it's getting down really low into the 140 area. I mean, I don't really. Let's see if we can bring it down to a monthly for a few years. Let's go 10 years and see what it looks like on a monthly. Yeah, this 140, this 137, 138 area seems to be a pretty big area, so I would imagine it's gonna start bouncing. Plus, on the daily, you get a bullish divergence. You see the RSI is making a higher low, but yeah, it's making lower lows on the daily. So a bullish divergence is there. You would think it would bounce in the 140 area, or even down into the 136, 135 area. So definitely watch BABA. Now, I would be careful swinging this because anything can happen with Chinese stocks overnight, and I would just think at some point they're so oversold that it's got to bounce just a little bit. So I would watch it over 140, 147. Yeah, 147 for push to 150. 150 would be a big psychological number. You get all these gaps to 150, above 155 to 160 is a gap. You get a gap here, gap here. There's just tons of gaps between 145 and 175. So at some point they're going to fill if China stocks stop getting hammered by the government and stuff like that. FedEx, I know I've been whoops, it's a wrong stock. FedEx. It's one that I think is going to bounce. I mean, it dropped for earnings and stuff like that. But we're going into shipping season. I would imagine it should start picking up in the next week or two. So I would watch. Bring out the daily a little more on this, just to see what it looks like in a year time frame. Maybe let's bring it out a little more. Go 2 years. Just want to make sure there's no gaps in this area. Yeah, no, this looks pretty solid to me. So I would watch it over, say 230 for push to gap resistance at 235. Now, it could, usually they reject the first time they go to gap resistance, but it's not too far off. And if FedEx is strong, it could make a pretty big move, like right here on the daily. This is from 286 to 295. So this can make an easily 9-10 point move right there. So if it does do that, it could end up being at gap resistance in a daily candle itself. So, and it could possibly fill the gap. So if it does have any momentum, but like I said, I'd watch it over 230 for push to gap resistance, which is this 235 area. For then if that ends up breaking, you probably could see it run to 250. On FedEx. And then you get Facebook. Facebook has just gotten has dropped a little bit from the news with I think it was Apple. Then it had a strong day on Friday, so I would watch over Friday's high of 250. You can round it up to 255 for a push to 360, 365. 370 would be a big area. 375. Now, like I said, earnings season is coming. These tech companies love running into earnings, running up into earnings. So I don't have Netflix on the watch list, but Netflix is one that's notorious for running into earnings. But I mean, look at it; it's $600. So we'll have to see what Netflix does this week. So tech loves to run into earnings. Now another one is Win. Now, when it's just filled the gap right here. I looked at it last week. It didn't quite fill the gap, but this time it did. So I would definitely watch it over 80, 86.50 for push to 90 and to 100 to fill these two gaps right here and here. So, and you also see on the hourly, you get a head inverted head and shoulders, the left, the head, the right shoulder. So if this pattern plays out, you should definitely see a strong move to 90, 95 to 100 on win. ROKU is another one. ROKU just started to get some momentum, and analysts dropped that it downgraded it. And these analysts are sketchy scumbags. They like to when like just for instance, they like after you have a massive run into ROKU, they'll do an upgrade at all-time highs, that way so they can unload the positions, and if it starts to take off like it did right here, they'll downgrade it so it gets hammered so they can get back. And these analysts are really dirtbags, and I think they just manipulate the market so they can exit the positions and get better entries, if you ask them. My opinion. That's just my opinion, so that's my 2 cents. But I would watch ROKU over, let's see, 320. You could say 325 for push to 330, 340. Now, ROKU hasn't had one of those monster days yet, like it has like here or here. ROKU likes to have those notorious $25 to $50 runs in a day. Like right here, this was this was a 426 to 474. That was almost a $50 day right there. So ROKU hasn't had a monster run like that. I think that they're going to end up having one soon. They end up having these things on Mondays for some reason. Let's see what the date is on that. The 23rd. What's the day before that? 22nd, 21st, 20th. It looks like that was on a... Yeah, that was on a Friday, which is weird. But usually they have these big runs on Mondays when premiums are high. So I would watch, definitely watch for ROKU. I mean, you look at the weekly. I mean, the weekly looks really good. It's get nice support here in the 315 area. So I would definitely watch that for a push to make a nice push to 340, 350, even 360. It'd be nice to see it up to the 380, so don't count ROKU out. I mean, unless it gets more downgrades. I think that any downgrades on ROKU is just it's just a buying opportunity, in my opinion. Now, Twitter, I have Twitter and pins on here, and they're just, I don't know, for some reason they just can't get any momentum. Except it did have momentum the last couple of days, so we'll have to see if Twitter can continue the momentum or not, or if it ends up pulling back here. But the RSI and the hourly is getting kind of overbought, but they could end up bringing it down just a little bit. But I would watch it over 67.50 for a push to 70, 72, 70, 73. We'll have to see if it will actually continue that. So I mean, it does have an inverted head and shoulders on the weekly, so over 73. This thing could end up taking off to 80, 85 plus. So you get the left shoulder, the head, and the right shoulder. So I have to see if that will actually play out. I mean, it is kind of overbought on the hourly. It could pull back to like the 65 level before it actually does decide to take off more. So the RCT trend line on the daily is at 65, so that would make sense if it did do that. So now pins is one that I keep looking at, but every time it loves to do fake outs in the morning, and I really hate that. It starts to look bullish and it gets slammed almost every 30 minutes of the day. It does a fake out. I really can't stand that it does that, but it's just, yeah, right here it starts to look good and it gets pulled down a little bit. It really annoys me that it does that, but I will be watching because I think it's actually kind of setting up here now a little better. Now that's been consolidating down in the 55 area, so I would watch it over, I would say 55 for push to 56, basically every whole dollar, 57, 58. Now the gap resistance right here is $60 now. I think likely it rejects before it ends up taking off, so push to 60, then maybe consolidate or pull back right there. So that's my thoughts for the week. Now, like I said, we have Powell. You need to be in the room and watch the Trade Ideas channel pre-market because I put some plays up. You also need to make sure that the gaps and the gap downs, gap ups overnight do change the dynamics of the play. That's why you need to be in the room. And obviously the news. So yeah, so you got to pay attention to that. So that is going to do it for the video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.